and welcome to another entry of the Coronavirus Diary. Today is Monday, March 23rd. So today here I am with my guest, Andy Rieckhoff. So Andy, can you please tell me what you do for a living and where you're currently located?
Thanks for having me, Ravi. I'm currently located in Fargo, North Dakota, and I am a radio talk show host and a producer for a couple of radio shows on Bison 1660 AM in Fargo, North Dakota. Cover a lot of North Dakota State athletics and obviously a lot of sports. Sports talk is kind of what we do, and there's not much of that going on right now.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you, how has the coronavirus pandemic affected your job?
It's affected it quite a bit because what we do is, I'm part of a show Monday through Friday, and I'm my own show on Saturdays. And what we do for 2 hours on all those shows is we talk about sports, whether it be mostly, collegiate, because we cover a university up here. That's the big storyline in North Dakota, in Fargo at least, is the colleges. But even professional sports, we have all that stuff, and now we really don't have that stuff to talk about. So for 2 hours, we kind of have to find different things to talk about. Now with sports, the cycle is there's always something because football's still going on. So there's always a little bit of a news cycle. You can't completely shut it off. But for the most part, there's just not as much content to talk about. So we have to be creative in how we do it. And it takes more planning and more preparation. And then also for us here at work, there's usually a whole sales staff that's also here, and they're basically not here anymore. They're all working from home, and it's kind of just a shell or a skeleton crew, I guess you could say, of people that are actually working here. We typically have 20 to 30 people in the office building, and now we have like about 6 to 7, maybe 8 at a time. That's about the most we have. So definitely changed the way things are done, but for us, it's just about being creative.
And then I guess another question is, so clearly you don't have any sports to talk about. So how do you fill up your time then?
For us, how we fill our time on the shows, at least, is the few stories we do have. So it's a little bit of NFL free agency talk still around this time of year. The NFL thankfully did not, cancel the start of their season. Since they're in the off season, they can kind of just keep going as planned for now, which is a big benefit for them. So we've had a little bit of NFL news, which has been nice. And then for us, it's a lot of reflection back to just a couple of weeks ago when everything was going just fine and our basketball team was playing and they won their conference tournament. So reflection on that. And then for us too, it's a lot of similar guests. So we have the same guests on that we would have had on typically around this time of year. But instead of talking about, what tournament game coming up are you really excited about? It's what's your family doing? How are you and the 3 kids doing, coping with having to be inside all the time? The questions just kind of change, but a lot of the guests have stayed the same, at least at this point. And then also we try to be creative and try to come up with different brackets. So what's your favorite sports movie of all time? And just trying to interact. It's more interaction with the audience, the listeners for us.
Right.
Now we're trying to get them to come in and fill the time that we would have used talking about sports. So you propose a couple of questions to your audience and you get them to email you or call you and interact with the show. And it becomes more interactive with the community, which is kind of a fun way to do it, whether it be favorite movie of all time, maybe your favorite sports moment, just kind of bringing those questions up and letting everybody else kind of have a conversation about it.
Right. So how has the coronavirus affected your workflow, I guess?
So for me, how it's affected me, at least at my job, is that we have 2 shows here. So we have a 4 to 6, which I've been doing since I've been here for about 2 years now at this point. 4 to 6 show in the evenings. But we also have a show that's 11 to 1, our midday show called The Insiders. And there was somebody else that was the producer for that one, but he was on a part-time basis. And because our company isn't bringing in as much money, and because the reason why they're not bringing in as much money is because we have advertisers, and those advertisers don't want to advertise right now because their business is closed. That makes perfect sense. We don't want to advertise all these specials we got going on when you can't come in to get them. You don't want people coming in and out in the public. So that makes sense, but it means less money into our organization and our company as a whole. So the part-time staff gets pared down a little bit, and they try to whittle that down. So that meant that he couldn't do that show. So now I'm doing both shows, and it's a little bit more work, but I enjoy all my coworkers and stuff. So it's kind of fun for me because one keeps me going. It's a little bit more stuff just to do every day, which is not a bad thing, at least this time of year. But definitely changed things a little bit at work with our financial situation for the entire company, just because there's less advertisers. That will come back at some point, but right now it's about trying to be as diligent as we can with those advertisers and those clients, and understanding their needs and concerns, because then when all this goes away, they'll remember that we did that for them, and it'll make it easier to keep those clients and relationships built.
Very interesting. Thank you. On your talk show, when you have your guests, how often has the coronavirus pandemic topic came up to your show? How many guests have kind of like, came in and talking about that?
Well, for us, having a guest on and how many times they bring up the coronavirus is kind of frequent, because it's affected all of us so much. Even our guests, let's say we have a guest on who's a play-by-play guy for a national broadcasting company, and he's calling all the games. Well, it's going to come up eventually because his life has been impacted so much. We don't dwell on it. We try not to, because me personally, obviously, I'm not a doctor or anything. I'm a radio show host, and same with all my colleagues. We don't know enough. We're educated on it, but we don't know enough to speak factually about it. So we don't dive into it at all, but we mention it. We bring it up. How has your life changed since the coronavirus? I guess is kind of how we frame it up to some of our guests, or they mention it that way as well. I don't really dwell on it a whole lot, but we just kind of mention how it's changed things. And again, the question of what are you doing with your family? How is life for you different? Or what are you doing to stem the tide of being isolated and quarantining yourself, I guess, a little bit. So some of those kind of questions. We don't dwell on it too much, but it definitely comes up with everybody.
Right. Well, I was going to ask a couple of those questions you just kind of mentioned, but speaking to you personally, how has it impacted you living in North Dakota? What's changed in your daily routine, I guess?
In terms of things that have changed for me, I don't think a lot personally, at least, has changed. Obviously, I'm more alert of how many times I wash my hands or touch my face. That's the reaction of everyone. Every time you go up to touch your face, you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that or something like that. But I wasn't anyone that went out and bought 20 rolls of toilet paper. I'm a single guy. I don't have a wife or kids or anything. So I'm a single guy that lives in an apartment. So I'm already kind of socially isolated from people a lot of the time, I guess, in my apartment, which is a bonus for me when all this kind of stuff came out. But, I did stock up more on maybe some pasta and just certain items that I knew I would like to eat and that might go kind of quick, because I knew a lot of other people were buying pasta too. So I made sure I got a little bit. I didn't go out and hoard it or anything and buy a bunch of boxes, but just get out and get enough for me for a week or so and make sure I'm okay there. Same with milk and a few other items. But thankfully for me, it hasn't affected me or anyone I know. Family members or friends. No one I know at least has been diagnosed as positive from COVID-19. And North Dakota as well. People make fun of North Dakota a lot because it's not maybe the most densely populated area, or people. There's not a lot to do. It's extremely flat, extremely flat in North Dakota. So people make fun of us for that kind of stuff. But it's a benefit now because the areas that are affected more are densely populated, where you can, if one person is infected, they can spread it to people easily because it's a densely populated area and they come into contact with a lot of people. I don't have to say there's nobody in North Dakota, because Fargo is one of the more densely populated areas. So, that is kind of a negative for us, I guess, when it comes to the coronavirus. But for the most part, it hasn't had a chance to spread just because it's not a densely populated area, I guess. At least that's what I think, because again, I'm not a doctor, but with not as many people being in the area, I think it's been easier to keep it kind of somewhat under wraps.
Right. Well, speaking of density population, have you been kind of out and about, like at grocery stores? Is it pretty empty compared to like in the cities here? It's pretty, there's like rare, like it's almost close to shutdown pretty much. Like all of our stores, there's like lines now. So is there a kind of similar trend?
I will say one thing I don't miss from the cities where you're at, Robbie, is the traffic. I know the traffic can be horrendous sometimes, especially in the morning. We never really deal with that a whole lot in Fargo. We don't have huge traffic jams, but it's even less now. There's definitely less people on the roads. I can tell that when I'm going into work that a lot of people are working from home now, and there's just not as many people out and about going to restaurants or different things like that. It's definitely quieter later in the evening. People are just at home and not doing anything instead of running around to a whole bunch of different activities. It definitely looks a little bit different, but not a whole lot different. I will say for me, I've done a really good job of staying inside and not doing a whole lot, but I am someone that likes to work out and stay in shape, and I'm a big runner, an advocate of running and staying healthy with your cardiovascular system. So I went on a little 5-mile run a couple of days ago, and there were more people than I suspected out either walking, running, or riding a bike with their families or just by themselves. So there's definitely people still being active and trying to keep doing something, keep yourself busy, but not a lot of difference in terms of just your everyday, traffic and different things like that. But it's a little bit down, but not a whole lot.
Wow. Would you like to add like anything else that you might want to cover that you haven't really talked about?
I would just say up in Fargo, it's a pretty well-knit community. A lot of people in this area, if you know somebody, you know a lot of people basically, and we've done a really good job of kind of banding together and everyone kind of doing their part. Been very good at a lot of the local city, like city council or just city community members have done a really good job of kind of coming together. The police department's done a good job of getting meals out to kids with the schools closing down and some kids kind of relying on that meal for them. Their families relying on the kids getting the meal at school. Done a good job with those kind of programs. The small businesses, it's a town of a lot of small businesses. So you do have your big chain restaurants, but there's a lot of local small town flavor to it. Very unique restaurants, especially the last 4 or 5 years that have opened up. So they're also pretty new, pretty young restaurants that a lot of people are kind of worried about them with obviously restaurants closing down as well, but we've done a good job of getting the message out. And that's one thing we do on the radio side of things as well, since we are still up and operational, at least for somewhat of an operation, kind of a toned down version of it. But
Sure.
Getting the message out of go to your small businesses, go to those restaurants and pick up food from them. You can't go into them, but you can put in an order and then go pick it up or something like that. We've really made sure to push that message out. So it's a really closely knit community, and I think it stayed that way even with all this stuff kind of going on. It's unprecedented, but we're dealing with it as best we can. Predict it coming, it happens, and then you have to try and respond to it. So I don't know if we can prevent it from not happening, but I think the response, that's something we can learn from this, is how do we, once it starts happening, not just once it gets to America, but once you start seeing it happen in the Asian countries where apparently it originated, how do you prepare for this, knowing that it's a possibility it could get here and it could get bad, just like this one has? How do you prepare yourself for it and make sure you have the medical supplies necessary to test for it, to treat it, and to be able to make sure everyone's safe from it? I think that's the main thing we have to take away from this, is not maybe how to prevent it, because it might not be preventable. These are viruses and organisms that we can't see, but how do you go about fighting them once they happen? I think that's something we can take away.
Wow, very cool. Well, thank you, Andy, for your input there. So I think that was pretty much all I wanted to ask you there. So guys, thanks again for Andy for joining us on our YouTube channel here. Please remember to like, share this video, and subscribe to our channel.